Author's note. Certain witnesses in this case who have not appeared in court have been given pseudonyms to protect their identities. Prologue. 6th of April 2005. Why are you doing this? The menacing figure crept up the garden of Ice House, stealthily making his way through the hedges and across the well-kept grass. He had just scaled the 7-foot rear wall and didn't want to alert anyone to his presence in the garden. Not yet, anyway. Passing a yellow toy digger and plastic football left out on the concrete patio, the man couldn't have been in any doubt the children lived in the house. Reaching the back door, he gave it a loud knock, sure to expect an answer. He'd been informed only moments earlier that Irene White was now at home. It was shortly after 10 a.m, and Irene had just returned from dropping her 3 children to school. The day was only starting though, and there was lots to do. She stood at the kitchen sink wearing orange gloves as she rinsed the dishes left over from the breakfast rush. Music blared from the radio perched on the counter, while the white curtain was pulled across the kitchen window. She wouldn't have heard or seen the man creeping up her back garden, and only noticed someone was outside from the loud knock at the door. Her mother Maureen lived in a mobile home in the back garden and would call over every morning. Irene was security conscious, and as she walked to the back door, she called out to her mother. "The gate is swinging open," a male voice replied from the other side of the wooden door. The 2 timber gates at the side of the house had swung outwards in the past, but had only recently been fixed. Irene unlocked the back door to inspect what had happened for herself. As the door creaked open, she was greeted by an ominous figure towering over her. The gates hadn't swung open. It was only a ruse to lure Irene out from the safety of her home. Suddenly the man raised his left hand, holding a large knife which he had concealed by his side. He lunged at Irene, and without saying a word, plunged the knife into her chest. She was pushed backwards and fell through the doorway, stumbling through the utility room and into the kitchen. Raising the knife above his head, the man forcefully brought the serrated blade down onto Irene's chest once more. She tried to grab hold of him, but standing at just 5 feet 4 inches tall, she was overpowered by his larger physique. The violent struggle continued in the kitchen. A glass jug shattered into pieces as it was knocked over, while 2 kitchen chairs also went crashing to the floor. Panicked and bewildered by what was happening, Irene cried out, "Stop! Why are you doing this?" The man remained silent as he thrust the knife into Irene again, and again, and again. From the very moment Irene had opened the back door, she never stood a chance. As she lay motionless on the kitchen floor, the man leaned over her, breathing heavily from the frenzied attack and taking in what he'd done. Irene was dead. That he was sure of. He kneeled beside Irene's body and muttered the Our Father prayer before getting back to his feet. Stepping through the pool of blood, he made his way out the back door and vaulted over the rear garden wall. The killer had left a trail of bloody footprints in his wake as he fled. He had also left 3 children without their mother, having viciously taken the life of a much-loved and caring woman. The hunt was about to begin for the man who had murdered Irene White. But he hadn't acted alone. Chapter 1. Happy Beginnings. By April 2005, Irene White knew that her life was in danger. Her fears had been well documented through conversations with friends, counsellors, and the Gardaí, as well as private diaries she kept. Despite being just 43 years old, she was considering making a will, believing that her death could be imminent. A bright and intelligent woman, she knew to tell people close to her about her concerns. She felt it was a case of not if it would happen, but when. Life hadn't always been like this for Irene, though, and most of her years had been spent living a normal and peaceful existence, free from the worry that someone was after her. Born on 22nd of October 1961 in the rural Louth village of Omeath, she was the youngest of Maureen and Matthew McBride's 3 children. She grew up in the family cottage at Knocknagoran, known as Kjol, which had been willed to Maureen by her father. Irene's older siblings were Anne and Michael, but tragedy struck the McBride family on 26th of June 1963. Michael, then aged 6, was knocked down by a car in front of the family home. He later passed away from his injuries, and the driver of the vehicle was charged with dangerous driving causing death and driving with no insurance. It was the first of several tragedies to impact the family. In 1972, Matthew McBride passed away following a battle with cancer. Irene was enrolled in St. Lawrence's National School in Omeath and then moved to the nearby St. Michael's College in 1974 to begin her second-level education. She was a studious teenager, receiving 7 honours in her intercert before sitting her leaving cert in 1979. Irene was sociable during her time in school, with friends saying she always looked at the funny side of things in life. She was an enthusiastic badminton player and was also known for her distinctive hobbies. She raised goats and chickens at the family cottage. Her first job, while still studying for her leaving cert, was as a receptionist at Dundalk Aluminium, before later being employed by a coal company on Quay Street in the town. She would spend most of her 20s with that company, while also taking up a variety of educational courses in the 1980s, including one in mechanics and one in psychology. A gifted student who shone at English in her school years, she also became involved with the Omeath Development Association and helped in organising the local gala festival for several years. In 1986, she began her first serious relationship when she met George Bannister, a customs official from Dublin who'd relocated to Omeath for work. He encountered Irene one night and was smitten with her charm and beauty. The romance developed and they began renting a property together at Chapel Hill in Omeath, with Irene falling pregnant a short time later. On 23rd of February 1988, their daughter Jennifer McBride was born in Newry, County Down. Shortly after Jennifer came along, Irene took up work as a barmaid in Carlingford, then later moved back to Fife's in Dundalk, where she worked as a secretary. An extrovert, Irene returned to the more sociable pub work at the Century Bar in Dundalk. The owner, Tony O'Kane, had worked with Irene at the coal company on Quay Street, and she became good friends with his wife, Dimtna. Above all, Irene was dedicated to raising Jennifer, and soon the late-night pub work didn't suit her commitments as a mother. She gave up her part-time work at the Century Bar, but remained close friends with Dimtna O'Kane. The relationship between Irene and George had also become fraught, and the couple agreed to amicably go their separate ways. One friend would say of this, Irene said that George was spending time in the pub and leaving her at home alone with Jenny. She always wanted to better herself and knew this wouldn't happen with George. After the split, Irene and Jennifer moved back in with her mother, Maureen, affectionately known as Mo by her family, before Irene bought a house in Ashbrook, a quiet residential estate in Dundalk. Irene continued to pursue different educational courses. And in 1994, she obtained a practitioner's diploma in reflexology, later providing treatments from her home. Her enthusiasm for English and the arts also led her to taking part in amateur dramas put on by the Century Bar during the Maytime Festival in 1996. Through these shows, a local businessman caught her eye. His name was Alan White. A year younger than Irene, he was born on 11th of October 1962 and grew up in the family home in St Malachy's Villas in Dundalk, later training as an electrician upon leaving school. After several years of apprenticeships and work in that trade, he became involved in the security business, setting up his own company called Classic Security in 1994. To Irene and her friends, he was a charming man whose business success suited Irene's driven personality. They began dating, but there were some minor disagreements at the outset, with claims that Alan was still seeing another local woman. A friend of Irene's said of this, she put it to Alan about seeing the other woman. He denied it and said he'd finished with her. He moved into Irene's house in Ashbrook, and then his relationship with the other woman ended. Things were okay between Irene and Alan. She was in love with him, and as far as I could see, everything was fine. The security work was going well for Alan, and in December 1995 he bought Ice House on Domain Road in Dundalk with a mortgage of £66,000. His relationship with Irene was also becoming more serious. So much so that she decided to sell her house in Ashbrook and move into Alan's home with Jennifer. Irene also began working as a secretary for Classic Security, which was being run from a spare room in Ice House. And a portion of the sale of the Ashbrook house was invested into the company. The role Irene had taken on was previously that of Alan's sister, and the decision to replace his sibling with his partner irked Alan White's family, creating a bad feeling towards her. While working with the business, Irene also set about taking further courses in first aid, physiotherapy, and aromatherapy. Life appeared to be going well for her. The business was profitable, and to her friends, she seemed happy with Alan White. One friend, recounting this stage of her life, explained, "On meeting Alan, I thought he was handsome and pleasant, and he chatted away about everyday things. I remember feeling happy that Irene had met someone nice, and who had his own business and seemed comfortable financially. I remember Alan bought a blue micra car for Irene. She used this car to visit her mother in Omeath. Irene was thrilled with this car. She had it for a couple of years. Over the years meeting Irene, she was always happy and seemed content." Another acquaintance said that Irene seemed extremely happy and was mad about Alan, while looking forward to a great future with him. The couple took the next step in their relationship soon after, when Alan asked for Irene's hand in marriage. She happily accepted the proposal, and a date was soon set for the wedding. While her friends said she was delighted at the prospect of marrying Alan, there were issues within the four walls of Ice House that weren't obvious to those on the outside. Her daughter Jennifer would later tell Gardaí of one occasion when she saw Irene upset in the lead up to the wedding. "I woke up and heard my mother crying in the kitchen," Jennifer said. "The kitchen was upstairs and directly across from my room. I got up and asked Alan what was wrong with Mam. He sent me into her in the kitchen. When I saw Mam crying, I started crying. And when I asked Mam what was wrong, she said that Alan had kissed another girl. By that, I know she was saying Alan cheated on her." Despite the alleged infidelity, the couple ironed out these issues, and the wedding went ahead as planned, with Irene marrying Alan on the 23rd of June 1998 at St Patrick's Church in Dundalk. It was a low-key affair, with only a handful of people present. Irene's family wasn't invited, apart from Jennifer, and despite Alan's mother living in Dundalk and him having 6 siblings, only his brother Derek and his wife were present as witnesses. The secretive nature of the ceremony annoyed members of the White family, who believed it was Irene's decision to have a discreet wedding. Describing the White family's view on the small ceremony, a friend of Irene's said, They never warmed to her after this. They felt it was Irene's idea to have a small wedding, and they couldn't understand why Alan's sisters couldn't be there. The wedding party later went to Fitzpatrick's restaurant in the town for the reception meal, before the newlyweds celebrated their honeymoon on a Mediterranean cruise. While her mother and stepfather were celebrating their nuptials, Jennifer went to stay with her Aunt Anne, who by this stage had relocated to England. In 1979, Anne had met Kenneth Corbett from Newry, later marrying him and moving to Manchester in 1983. They had 2 daughters and had changed their surnames to Dalcassian. Dimpna O'Kane, despite being a close friend of Irene's, also hadn't been invited to the wedding and would later tell Gardaí, "Irene rang me the same night to tell me she had great news. I told her I already knew that she had got married that day. Irene told me that Alan specifically said he didn't want me or any of her friends at the wedding. Her sister Anne wasn't asked. We weren't in as much contact after the wedding as before. I knew Alan didn't like me, so I saw Irene when she came to see me." While on the face of it, Irene appeared happy with newly married life, cracks began to develop in the marriage within a year. A significant factor, Irene told her friends, was Alan's drinking. After one particularly nasty row, Irene and Jennifer left Ice House and went to live with Maureen in Omeath. Irene was making efforts to move out permanently, even having her friends accompany her to view a property in the Avondale area of Dundalk in the hope of leaving Alan. She was in a terrible emotional state, one friend recalled. She was with a young child and had nowhere to live. They also claimed that Alan threw her out, and no sooner was she gone than he was ringing her, telling her he loved her and blaming his bad temper and drinking on his past relationship with his father. But another confidant said Irene was crazy in love with Alan and she agreed to go back to live with him in Ice House. It was also around this time that she discovered she was pregnant with the couple's first child. Her friends said that Irene still had concerns about Alan's drinking, despite the prospect of his becoming a father, which was placing a further burden on their relationship. On 10th of February 1999, she went into labour, and Irene called Dimpna O'Kane down to Ice House to support her. Dimpna arrived there shortly after 8 p.m. And recalling what happened, she would later tell Gardaí, as the night progressed, Irene was aware that Alan was drinking and not doing what he was supposed to do. The nurses arrived and Alan was still drinking. During the time I was there, Alan came up several times and asked us did we want to drink a whiskey. We declined, but he kept drinking right through the night. The following morning at 9 a.m, the couple's first child, Dowan White, was born at Ice House in a home delivery. The christening was held several months later, but, as with the wedding, none of Irene's friends were invited. The only people present for the ceremony were Alan's family. Dimpna would see less and less of her close friend as time went on, but they would stay in contact by phone, with Irene venting her annoyance at Alan while she was at home minding their baby. A short time later, Irene became pregnant again, but her husband's escapades continued. Irene was very unhappy because she knew what was facing her. He was acting like a single fella, out drinking heavily, one friend recalled. On the 4th of July 2000, Irene went into labour. Dimpna O'Kane was on hand to help her once more, bringing her for a drive around Louth. While driving through the village of Blackrock, Irene's waters broke and they made their way back to Ice House. In a later statement, Dimpna would say of Alan that night, he appeared at some stage as Irene was ringing him to get him out of the pub. Alan came back to the house. He continued drinking. When Irene and I came back from Blackrock, it was about 7 p.m. The nurses didn't arrive until after 10 p.m. We were upstairs and he was downstairs drinking. You could see the disappointment and frustration on Irene about the way Alan was behaving. That night, their baby girl, Darlene, was born. The couple's second child, and Irene's third. With a wife and 3 children to look after, Alan White was looking at other potential business opportunities to provide a comfortable life for his family. In the same month that Darlene was born, Alan's friend Niall Power set up a company called Premier Protection and Surveillance Security, which became known as PPS Security. Niall was from Jenkinstown, a small village outside Dundalk on the Cooley Peninsula in County Louth, and had worked with Alan at Classic Security before setting off to pursue his own business ventures. 10 years Alan's junior, Niall looked up to him as a mentor. He did have reservations about setting up the company, having only recently run into trouble with the trawler business that resulted in him owing a lot of money. However, on Alan's advice, Niall decided to proceed with setting up PPS Security, which carried out security work for a number of businesses around Dundalk, including providing door staff for bars in the busy town. One of their employees was Niall's housemate, Jerry Ross, while a number of young men from the area were also employed to carry out the security work. Over time, Niall and Alan White became close friends and would socialise in the pubs around Dundalk, planning their business exploits into the early hours of the morning. Their partners would also be invited on occasion, and Irene got to know Niall's girlfriend, Ellen Johnson. From South Africa, Ellen met Niall while working in a Phoenix bar in 2001, before they became serious and bought a house in the Garrybawn area of the town. The romance eventually fizzled out, but Irene remained in contact with Ellen, and they would become good friends. While Alan White appeared to be no more than a casual employee of PPS Security, all indications were that he was the driving force behind Niall's successful business. The company used the room in Ice House as an office, and Irene was brought on board for a period to work as a receptionist. In October 2001, she turned 40 and decided she needed a weekend away to celebrate the milestone. She travelled with a friend to Galway, enjoying 2 nights' respite from family life. It would, however, cost her when she returned home, with her friend later recalling, "We had a great weekend. We came back, and later on that week, Irene told me that Alan had gone on a serious binge of drinking. And she said, 'I'll not be going away again in a hurry. I paid dearly for my so-called 40th birthday weekend.'" Life continued at Ice House. Dundalk had its fair share of criminality at the turn of the millennium. It was a hotbed for dissident Republican activity that had carried over from the Troubles, while organised crime, which was growing in Dublin, started spreading out from the capital into towns around the country, including Dundalk. People in the town also had to contend with day-to-day criminality. After one particularly violent assault in the area in 2002, Alan White decided to install an extensive alarm system at Ice House to provide extra security for his family. Front door was covered by a camera that, if the doorbell was pressed, activated and relayed a live feed to a monitor inside, through which the family could communicate with any person at the door. Several panic buttons were also dotted around the house, one in each of the 3 front rooms, while an external security light operated at night. The systems had been installed by Alan's business associate Vincent Dullahan, who was 14 years younger and from Moortown in Dromaskeen, a townland around 10 kilometres south of Dundalk. The 2 men had met while working together in RD in 1998, and in the intervening years Vincent had set up a security company with his fiancée, Donegal woman Cathy Wilson, The company, Superior Security, was operated from the couple's home in Lanark Cross, Killarney, County Monaghan. Both had a close working relationship with Alan and Niall, regularly attending security conferences to familiarise themselves with the latest trends and developments in their business. Irene and Alan's marriage continued to be strained, and in 2002, she suggested that they attend couples counselling to solve their problems. Irene believed that her husband's drinking was the main issue in the relationship, something which Alan always denied. But he nonetheless agreed to attend counselling. He went to 7 appointments before deciding not to engage in the process any further, while Irene stayed for 4 more appointments on her own. That August, she realised that going to the couples session without Alan was pointless, and so began seeing her own counsellor in Dundalk. Her mother, Maureen, also wanted to be closer to her daughter, and towards the end of 2002, she bought a mobile home for €3,500, which was moved into the large back garden at Ice House. The prospect of having his mother-in-law living close by wasn't met with any objections from Alan White. As part of this move, Maureen also signed over her house in Knocknagoran to Irene, on the condition that she would have residency rights there until her death. The issues at Ice House persisted, and on 20th of April 2003, Gardaí were called to the family home. Irene had planned to travel to the nearby Carrickdale gym to go swimming with her daughter Doreen, but was prevented from leaving by Alan White. She walked to Dundalk Garda station that afternoon, alleging that her husband was blocking her from driving out of the front gate of the home. Garda John Prunty and a colleague accompanied Irene back to Ice House, and as they arrived, Alan emerged from the property. Garda Prunty spoke to him about the allegation Irene was making, with her husband becoming angry when confronted with the accusation, explaining that he did not want their daughter leaving with Irene. As Alan spoke, Garda Prunty noticed a strong smell of alcohol from him and thought that he was slightly incoherent too. While Alan acknowledged that he'd been drinking, he said he was annoyed that Gardaí had been called to his home. Alan White became increasingly irate and made a scene, leaving the Garda with no option but to direct him to desist and go back into the house. Having persisted momentarily, Alan was cautioned and told that he would be arrested under the Public Order Act if he didn't comply with the Garda's direction. Having thought better of it, Alan calmed down and went back into his home. After her husband had gone, Irene told the Garda that she would consider making a formal complaint. However, she eventually decided against it. Her reasoning for this, she would later inform the Garda, was that the difficulties between the couple had eased. While Ice House was her residence, Irene didn't have any legal entitlement to the property, and so on 9th of October 2003, she registered her marriage against the house, which prevents a spouse from selling the family home without their partner's consent. The following month, Irene once again called to Dundalk Garda station to inform Garda Prunty that her husband had removed a substantial amount of money from their children's credit union accounts. The sums withdrawn included a total of €6,500 in May 2003 and €5,000 in January 2002. She had lodged the money into the accounts following the sale of her house in Ashbrook, and Irene told the Garda that she only wanted to have the matter noted, as she believed she could retrieve the money. In truth, no crime had actually been committed, as Alan White's name was also on the accounts, and he was entitled to withdraw the money. While in the station that afternoon, Irene also spoke with Garda Colin Dempsey, who was locally known as the Domestic Violence Guard in Dundalk. He had, up to that point, served with An Garda Síochána for 22 years and specialised in issues relating to gender-based violence. This was despite the fact that no such designated role existed in the force in the 2000s, with Garda Dempsey ahead of the curve and providing specialised help to countless women and men within the district who would come to him with complaints about domestic abuse. Irene would meet with Garda Dempsey on more than 10 separate occasions over the next year, in many instances chatting to him at domestic violence seminars. During their conversations, Irene would outline her ongoing marital difficulties with Alan, revealing a pattern of verbal abuse and describing how she was constantly being put down by her husband. On some occasions, she alleged he'd been physically threatening to her, to the extent that she was becoming very fearful of him. In one meeting with the Garda, Irene described Alan as a Jekyll and Hyde personality. She didn't know from one minute to the next how he would be. Garda Dempsey informed her of her options under the Domestic Violence Act and strongly advised her to make a complaint, but she declined. The Garda believed she was gathering the strength to seek help and support from other services. Over the months, the cycle of abuse being disclosed was growing much worse, with Irene alleging that her husband's behaviour was becoming increasingly unpredictable, while he was also constantly picking on her daughter Jennifer. Despite regularly meeting with Gardaí, Irene hadn't yet made a formal complaint over the allegations, in the hope that things would get better. Other unforeseen issues were to develop. Telecommunications company Eircom owned a yard directly beside Icehouse, and in the summer of 2003 started inquiring about the possibility of developing their land. Any expansion, however, would be difficult, given that their yard bordered the White family home. That November, an Eircom representative arrived at Icehouse to speak with the homeowners. Would Alan White be interested? The Eircom official asked him in selling the property to the telecommunications company. It was a meeting that would set off a chain reaction and lead to matters deteriorating within Icehouse.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.